You're a brilliant academic with breakthrough tech. Now what? That execution gap is what kills more innovation than any other. And that's also where Eric Fernandez and Brazos Innovation Partners steps in. They don't just advise founders, they become them. They're founders as a service, FAS instead of SaaS. And we're going to talk to him about what it's like to be a startup for startups, how to pull innovation out of academia and take it to the private sector, and how any organization can start to look at commercializing great ideas. I'm Bryon Morrison. Let's get to the leaders list.
Everything is happening through these screens.
How are we getting the most out of that person?
I want to see this thing grow long term.
Amazing story. You have such a unique perspective on that.
Schedule a 2-week vacation.
I applaud those models.
Undervalue.
Secure your digital footprint as well.
Why were they even put in place in the first place?
Only the most adaptable survive. Let's get to the leaders list. All right, Eric Fernandez, welcome to the leaders list.
Thank you for having me, Bryon.
Absolutely. All right, CEO, founder, Brazos Innovation Partners. We go back quite a ways from all the way back when you were one of the rising stars at AT&T. And since that time, you've been a successful founder, started another company and sold that with Sports Desk Media. And so we can talk about all of those, but I'd love to give you just the opportunity to talk a little bit about Brazos and just what you guys are building today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a co-founder. I have two partners in Brazos Innovation Partners. I'm the chief business officer, yeah, it's a very interesting company. We're based out of Waco because our origins are in higher ed. We spun out from Baylor University. We were basically the technology commercialization arm, and essentially what we do is, we work with could be largely with higher ed, but now we're starting to branch out more into private companies and to working with founders. But anyone who's got an idea that wants to commercialize or feels that they have an idea or innovation that has got commercial viability, we help them bring it from concept or idea all the way into actual creating a consumer viable product. And I mentioned our roots are within higher ed. What we kind of founded was, professors are great, PhDs, academics, very thoughtful, always problem solving, but don't always necessarily have an interest in building companies. So where we spun out from and our origins, we're really working in higher ed and looking at, as patent disclosures would come through, identifying and creating a process then to evaluate, does that IP have commercial viability? And then from there, whether it's licensing, building companies, we'll sit alongside private equity funds that will then, have a tolerance for investing in early stage deep tech, because that's a lot of what we do is early stage deep tech and bringing that to life. So it's quite a journey. We're currently working with about 4 or 5 companies that were in various stages of commercialization. And it's been interesting because over the last year in particular, we've had more interest from private companies or even founders, just individuals who've had successful careers and have these ideas, and now they want to see if they can create and grow something. So yeah, it's been quite the journey.
And just so everybody understands your journey in that process, you've been working with Baylor for years in lecturer, adjunct. You've done a lot of stuff like that. So
yeah.
When you saw this, did you see this as something that was unique to Baylor, and you thought this will be only for the Baylor research teams and professors, or did you see this initially as something that every school should be thinking about or looking at?
Yeah, well, I'll give you a little bit of the backstory because by trade, from our background, I'm more of a sports marketing guy. I'm a business guy, but more, my background was in sports and entertainment marketing. And as you mentioned, my first company that I started was actually an agency, Sports Desk Media, that we were focused on sports and entertainment. But during COVID, so had the exit from Sports Desk Media, was doing some consulting work that during COVID dried up. And I had a professor friend, because as you mentioned, Baylor has a sports sponsorships and sales major that I've been involved with for about 20 years now. And the professor from that basically called me one day and he said, we're in the middle of COVID, everything's shut down. And he's like, Our Department of Research, there's a gentleman who's in the Department of Research that I'm friends with, and he asked me if I know anyone who's got marketing capabilities because he's working on a very large grant for the National Science Foundation. And they want to approach it more than just on research merits. They think they have a good story to tell, but he's not sure how to do it. He goes, and by the way, we're in COVID. I know you're not doing anything. So, putting my Baylor hat back on, I actually spent 10 months consulting with them and working on this project. And in the process, I met our CEO of Brazos Innovation Partners, a gentleman by the name of Matt Brantley, who was at Baylor at the time and was running their tech commercialization arm. And that became a foundational point in our proposal to the National Science Foundation, is taking a grant and actually creating a business so that it could become self-sustaining, self-funding beyond the time frame that the grant would actually fund. And because of that, Matt and I built a really good friendship and relationship. And I was intrigued. I've always been intrigued about technology and anything in the innovation space. And Matt started walking me through. And Baylor was the second university besides Duke to have a formalized commercialization process called Lab to Market. And Matt is a young guy. He was probably in his early 30s at the time, and just fully immersed himself to it and grew this organization to where it was kind of outgrew its roots within an academic organization, where we had a very amicable but mutual parting with Baylor, where they were like, look, we still want you to service us, but we don't necessarily want to grow an infrastructure that's not directly focused on research. And, the offshoot to that was we had the ability to go work with other folks. So if you would have asked me 5 years ago, I never would have found myself in this space. What happened is, after my project that I worked on for, expired, Matt said, he goes, can you stay on and consult with us? Because, we're creating companies, but we're academics. Nobody here has ever done a startup, and we don't know what we don't know. So originally I got kind of brought in just to be like the resident expert and somebody who had done a startup before and had an exit. And then 2 years into that, he said, well, we're going to spin out. So this was going on about 2003. We spun out in January 2003. So I think we're officially in like year 4. And it's been great because, I in the chief business officer role, Matt is a PhD in chemistry. My other partner is a master's in engineering. They're both very, very technically good and sound, and they understand the technology way better than I. And I just kind of run the operations of the business to make sure that we're profitable and that we're, can keep the lights on, and let them really focus on the actual, work of growing the business, but, or servicing the clients. But, for me, it's just been interesting because, like I said, I never would have pictured myself being here. And it's just kind of it's a testament to you, just like, don't let doors close. Like every
Right.
opportunity that opens. I mean, if I had said no to the 10-month project at Baylor, I never would have found myself here today. So yeah.
And it's really interesting. Like, you've got a pretty good crew. I mean, like, there's well over 25 people, and I was like, man, you did that since 2023, and then you realize that what really happened is you absorbed a company and commercialized it yourself. You and your team.
Yeah.
And so that's a really interesting situation, because it's it's a lot of the reason that we talk to people about doing M&A, because it starts you immediately, with the foundation, with you've overcome all the challenges that come with the moving from 5 employees to 10 and 10 to 25, and you've already gone through it because you basically were able to just absorb it. So it's almost like an acquisition.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, it wasn't without its challenges. At the time when we spun out, we were probably about 10 people. So about.
Oh, okay. So you really have expanded pretty quickly in a very short period of time.
Yeah, we have expanded. And it was interesting because when we spun out, because we were within Baylor, every employee had the opportunity to go to either stay at the university or come with us. And if you stayed with the university, in some cases, your job would change or whatever it was. But, I think the one thing we found is, and I'm sure, this is probably not news, but not everyone's built to go work for a startup. And even though we had a lot of the protections, and we had a lot of the safety nets and the security of a contract with Baylor, and in a lot of cases, I would say things weren't going to change, because we actually didn't even change offices. The office space that we were at with Baylor, we ended up just leasing it from them. So those first 2 years, really, like, nothing ever changed, but there was this mentality. There were certain employees that just got really uncomfortable about, I have this safety and security of working for an academic institution, and now I'm going to go work for a startup. And it was scary. So there was, things that you normally wouldn't expect to happen. So we didn't have every employee come over. We had to kind of do some, I think some work there to get some other folks really just comfortable with the move over. And then, but like you said, it's kind of, we were kind of this acquisition to go, but then it's also fun because you go and you're like, okay, well, we got to figure out benefits and we got to figure out all just the basics so that those employees that do come with us don't feel like there's any real significant change in their life. So yeah, it was an interesting process to go through that because, like you said, it was, we literally did not move offices. We were, you finish your one last day at Baylor University and the next day you start and it's Brazos Innovation Partners and essentially nothing's changed. So
yeah, congratulations. You just got a new job and nothing's changed. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So now you've gotten to this point where you've gotten past the 25 person mark and you're starting to, well, I should ask you, what growth stage would you say that you are in today?
Yeah, I would say we're still in early growth stage. I mean, we're technically as Brazos Innovation Partners, this is year 4. In years 1, 2, and 3 have just been learnings. I mean, business models have changed. Our initial thesis of what we thought we were going to do when we got out, there's just been a lot of changes. I think too is, when you're a startup and all of your clients are startups, you are essentially at the whims of their fundraising cycles. And so there's a lot that we had to deal with that, and we continue to have to deal with that is unique to maybe not every business out there. Every business has their risks, but for us in particular, we have some significant ones because we have to be very closely tied to our clients to really understand not just their inner workings and their operations and the vision, but also really understand like the basics of their financials. Like that's a key thing that we've really had to evolve over time is the cadence and the timing and how we communicate and really the transparency with our clients, because, we've had situations a couple years back where, we're head down working, hard on a project and clients like, oh yeah, by the way, we ran out of money and our fundraising's we're about 60, 90 days behind where we thought we would be. Well, you can't just come in and slam on the brakes, so we've, and this is not just for us as an entity, but it's also for the benefit of our clients is we got to understand this cadence. So I think we've spent a lot of time really just kind of focusing on that and really understanding the unique dynamics of our business. And again, as we scale, I mean, because that's a key thing, because going from 10, 11 employees to 25, that's no insignificant change. And even, to the point, like we recently left the Baylor facility because we'd gotten big enough and we felt we outgrew it. And we've gone into our own first, our own facility, which is both exciting, but also scary when you sign that first lease for multi-years and, and making sure that we've got room to satisfy our needs right now, but also grow. And, and also we've got unique needs. I mean, we're still based in Waco, Texas, but, we've got, for one client, we need to have a quasi wind tunnel and we've got, labs and all sorts of things. So it's just been unique to kind of go through that growth stage.
Yeah. All right. Well, now we know it's not just Chip and Joanna.
No,
Brazos is also there.
That's right.
So, as you're going through this process and you're getting to, I love, a startup for startups, like that is a unique situation because you're kind of figuring out your own go to market, but the agency side should have, like that prepared you well for your ability to kind of become a chameleon and become a part of their organization. I think you guys, don't you refer to it as founders as a startup or founders as a service?
Yeah. So and really in the academic world, our core, like if you look at maybe the hub of the wheel of who we are, we're founders as a service. So we say FAAS, kind of our play on SaaS.
SaaS, right.
But this idea that, especially when we came through academic background is, most academics, they're PhDs, they're extremely bright people, but they're not the most savvy at business. They don't know what they don't know. So really what we would do is let's take a case where we have a company that comes out of Baylor, a technology. Let's not even call it a company because it's really not a company yet.
Right.
We have a private equity partner that agrees to fund it. They raise, they've got X amount put in there. They'll typically name a CEO, or there'll be at some point that they'll name a CEO, but everything else is us. So the whole founding team, from technologists through execution, is us.
Mm.
And really, because we find that, and we'll want to keep the professor on that was the ideator behind the concept in some sort of consulting capacity, because they still want to contribute and they have got great ideas of how things should be done and where the technology should be developed, but they don't want to run the business. I mean, they want to teach, they want to publish. In many cases, they're submitting for intellectual property because they want to, they want to use that as a mechanism for publication. So
Yeah.
for us, really, it's about developing that founding team, but then also like all the constructs around that, but then making sure that we're keeping the professor engaged, because they still can bring a lot of intellectual value, and they typically will come in some sort of consulting fashion directly. And then we'll build and nurture the company to the point where we'll let the private equity firm know it's probably about the time to bring a CEO in. They'll then bring a CEO. We'll, in many cases, help them identify the type of profile that they need. And then we'll continue to do that until we actually can get, to full commercialization, which, we're still working with a number of companies on getting to that. But it's kind of this gradual process where they pick up more as we start to give up more as we get, closer to really launching a company.
Sure. And so you're doing all of the foundational work to get somebody formed as a company. They're bringing the innovation to you. That all makes sense. What do you find as you're going through that to be? I meant to ask you before, do you have your own fund, or do you work with just PE partners and investors? And
Yeah.
how's it been just to compile that?
Yeah, we'll work with PE partners. We don't have our own fund.
Okay.
Our business model, just so you're aware, team, because it's unique in nature, is we are fee for service. So we do, as they raise money, we'll identify, the private. So basically, if we take our first phase of if we have a concept, let's call it, we'll run it through an entire business analysis. And this is too where we work very closely with like the MBA students at Baylor University, where we'll have them do a lot of the business modeling. We'll oversee it.
Oh,
yeah, which
that's
is great.
That's a cool connection, basically, to allow those people to play that analyst role.
Yeah, like I would even say, even today, of 25 employees, we're probably 7 to 8 of them are interns that are university students, and they cross the gamut. We have a number of PhD and grad students, but it's kind of a core foundation of who we are, is kind of this, intellectual curiosity and teaching is a core element of our culture. So it's very important to us. We want to grab students that have an interest in this. So we work very closely with Baylor's entrepreneurship program.
But that's not contractual. That's just because that's your core. That's who you were and where you came from, and it makes sense. It's a really nice alignment between, education and commercials. So that's great.
It is. And, in many cases for us, because, and especially if you're getting an entrepreneurship student, typically they're a grad student. They've gone through some form of, undergrad in another discipline, whether it's marketing, finance, whatever. But we're kind of pulling teams together and we're running this analysis, and we identify, what do we think the market opportunity is? Is it investable or not? That's basically presented to our private equity partner, who then makes the determination that they think, yes, we think this got viability and we want to invest in it or not. And that's really the first phase. Once they decide, yes, we want to invest in it, that analysis also indicates, for us to get to the next phase, what is it going to take? And what do we think it's going to take from a resource standpoint? So our business model is a combination of, we're fee for service, but all of our upside is we always get equity in all of these different startups. So we want skin in the game, but we also want to have that upside, that if we are truly the founders as a service, that we do get that upside once that company has commercial viability. It's
that makes sense
in that approach.
Yeah, and so the PE firm obviously has to be okay with that too, because they don't want to. But I would assume there are some financiers that look at this and go, "Well, that's kind of what we do. Like, we'll just go get involved in that." And so has that been hard for, to keep them at arm's length and go, listen, you're giving us this money and it's clearly going right to us
Yeah.
because we're going to do that work?
Yeah. I'll be honest with you. There's a group out of Waco called Waco Ventures, WAVE for short. They were in the first parts of the early days, so when Lab to Market was still within Baylor, they were the funding arm that was part of it. And they've got a number of funds. They'll also raise, on an individual company basis, on a SPE basis. But we just have a great relationship with them. I mean, I think that's something that
Right.
over the years, one is their entire thesis is around early stage deep tech. And a lot of it is even coming out of university settings, which is a key focus for them. So one, at the start, we have really strong alignment. I would tell you this, we are not built, the things that we do is not built for your average private equity firm. The risk tolerance is probably too high for them, but
Yeah.
Wave does a great job, and we have a great relationship with them where, we're in lockstep all the way along. So they understand that for us to have motivation and incentive, we need to have that skin in the game. So
Yeah.
every deal, we've kind of gotten to the point where they're all a little bit, unique, but we kind of have a general framework and a structure that we've worked with them, that they understand what the fee for service is, what that entails. And then we also realize that for us to really be, just not just motivated, but to really just have, we want to be successful as these operating companies are successful. And we have just kind of a mutual shared strategy in that. And again, they've been really good partners, and we've helped them bring some other, folks who've got interest in this to raise with them. And, we're also starting to look, there's some other funding partners, but a lot of this is kind of getting that conceptual, alignment at the beginning of how these things work.
Yeah.
Because with most traditional funds, our model is very, is not necessarily within the norms of what they normally do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. So what is it that right now you've gotten to a point where you can start to settle into some standards, right? Like, we know what it takes to get to market. We know what it takes to foundationally structure the leadership team and get it into a business versus a concept. We know what's involved in all that process. Now, what is on your leaders list with reference to Brazos? And what are the things that you're focused on right now in this growth stage? Because I'm always curious about the specific tactical work that,
Yeah.
Leaders are going through.
Yeah. I think this will probably strike you maybe as coming out of a little bit of left field, but, culture is probably number one on the list. We are really focused on building and maintaining our culture as we scale. First off, we're in Waco, Texas, so getting talent to come to Waco, Texas is not the easiest ask to make. But as we continue to grow, we've got pipelines, whether it's into Baylor University, we've got pipelines into other universities, but really just, identifying the right quality people, because we're still a lean enough company at our stage. And we always intentionally operate lean. We can't miss on a hire. So we've got to really make sure that as we're identifying where we're going, the roles that we're going to need, that culture is first and foremost, the variable that we're measuring against. Is this person going to be a good fit? Are they going to be a good team member? Are they going to be, disruptive? Whatever it might be. If they're, and I think, this, Bryon, I mean, we've hired people before. I've hired some of the most talented people in the world that were just not good cultural fits for the organization, and they almost become terrorists inside of it. So, I think that's largely driven by me. My partners have never done a startup before. They've worked in early stage, and they're both amazing individuals that have just really embraced that idea of let's identify and build culture. Culture comes from the top down. So it's from the three of us as the co-founders that we really have to drive that from top to bottom. We got to define it and we got to drive it. So I'd say culture is at its core. And then really the hard part for us is looking ahead at not just what our current clients need, but the clients in our pipeline that we think we're going to get. And do we have the skill sets and the resources to be able to service them? And especially as they scale. Like, I'll share with you, we have got one company right now that's pretty further along. It's a company I'm really excited about called 6P Color. The short is this: they're a color management technology, which basically people who are watching this, who are watching it on a computer or maybe on a really high-end display, the little known fact is those displays can only show about 48% of the range of the color spectrum. And 6P Color can adjust that to where they can actually take an existing device or display and actually expand it to probably 75 to 80%. And then there's some technology that can expand it even further. But, one of the things like with 6P is over the last year, they have pivoted strategy largely due to a lot of the work we've done with them. And they're on the verge of blowing up. So it's created two things. For us, we got to staff up more. And for them, they got to raise more money because we've got a number of commercial partners that want to come in. We've spent, the last, call it 18 months, proving the technology and building the pipeline. And it's about to burst because we have 3 or 4 clients that are market ready right now that want us to engage. And the only thing that's keeping us back is talent, people, and money. So those are the types of things where we're trying to constantly stay ahead of if this, then that is how do we really manage and expand the business and, based in totality, but also on each client based on how we see the trajectory of each of those different client projects going. And 6P is one that, 12 months ago, if you would have said, hey, would you be here today? We never would have guessed. So this is almost like real time. Like we're trying to change the tires as we're driving down the road at 50 miles an hour. And that's probably the hardest part is just making sure that we're able to scale and expand as our clients, as the marketplaces reacting to what our clients are developing.
And so for you to do that, you have to think about processes, people. That's why culture is so important right now, to make sure that you can plug somebody in, they can be effective early. And so, everything you're talking about checks out. Let's flip the script a little bit now. We've talked about Brazos and the companies that you guys are building and working with. Say I'm running a business and I've got a concept and I want to commercialize that concept. What are some of the things that should be on my leaders list now, based on all your expertise, having seen this for a few years and worked with some great companies? What would you say is the first things that should be on there, the foundational things on my list?
I think one of the first things we love to do is just sit down with ideators, founders, and just understand what's the inspiration behind your business. What was the thought? What was what was it that occurred that you said you thought that this had market viability? So the first thing we do if we're running something is just a really detailed market analysis. Like, I'm trying to really objectively, and I think that's the hardest thing for a founder is, they are, there's no ugly babies. Everyone can come to us. In some cases, that's the hard part, is going back to a founder and saying, this idea that you have really isn't everything you thought it was cut up to be. But more specifically, to answer your question, is, the foundation of what we do is an independent, and I would say just a very neutral market analysis. But I also think the other is identifying, as we start talking and really interviewing the potential founder, is, so what's your motivation? What made you think of this? And then as we do research and we find it's like, okay, we have this competitor. Have you heard of them? What do you know of? Really trying to get their assessment of, do they have blind spots? And I would say, like, that is a key thing that we have to vet out and suss out in every client, is really understanding the blind spots, but also those that have an awareness to know that they have blind spots, those that don't think they have it. Because that's key.
Yeah, that's so interesting to me, Eric, because it's like that movie Flash of Genius, with Greg Kinnear, windshield wipers, right?
Yeah.
And so at first when you said that, I was like, it's interesting to know the motivation, but it's kind of interesting to me because it's almost like you're using that as a psych test to understand how in love are they with the concept. Versus how have they looked at it objectively? Is that why you're asking for that flash of genius moment?
That's exactly it. Is trying to get to some level of objectivity. Because look, in many cases, people can have great ideas, but we may not want to work with someone because there's, because of, back to like the culture, the culture of the personalities.
Sure.
Have somebody, but if they're, if we've worked with folks before that are so, and I love being convicted in your ideas and your thoughts, But if you're so convicted that you don't leave open the possibility that there could be an alternative, that's a red flag for us in determining. So a lot of this is not just the, I would say the business basics of the metrics of, do we think like, what's the addressable market and where's the market share potential? And is there a unique differentiator? All those are questions we go through, but really a lot of what we're trying to get to is, I think I heard the saying once is, firm convictions lightly held. And I think we're looking for people who have that mentality. They love their idea, they want to back it, but they're also open to there may be a better way of getting to market, or there may be an opportunity they hadn't really even thought of. And that's actually something we encounter more than you would probably imagine.
Yeah. Firm convictions lightly held is very, very, that's great.
Yeah.
So you're going to look for that flash of genius moment and then their objectivity. So that's a cultural match. And then you do the market analysis.
Yeah.
That's pretty straightforward. What else do you look for? Again, if I'm thinking about spinning something out, I'm thinking about creating something.
Yeah.
How would you do that? You've also had some great experience, understanding how a company like AT&T works.
Yeah.
And how does a product, get identified and then rolled out to market? So it's big company, small company, still relevant, but it's almost like its own process.
I would say once we get through all those steps that you've discussed, one of our key points is, what we would call a validation phase. And we want to take and talk to friends or talk to people within this industry and get validation of what are they seeing, what we're seeing, and, and this could be, in any, in a variety, and it doesn't have to be, a statistically valid sample size of, N equals 1,000, in some cases we may, but, we'll come in and we'll say, okay, we think this technology is going to be suited for this market. In some cases, like I'm thinking of one, there's in the health sciences space, it's a medical technology that we actually got the inventor or the conceptor to invest so we could build a prototype. And we did some usability testing with potential end users to make sure and just get that validation point early. That validation point is easy or is critical in the early stages, because especially if we're talking to friendlies, a lot of this, Bryon, it's like nothing different is what problems are we solving for them? And if we come to them and we think we're solving problems A, B, and C, we need to validate that A, B, and C are their most pressing problems and we are solving them. But in many cases, we also find out it's like, well, A, B, and C maybe aren't the most important problems. We haven't thought about D and E, and that's the case where until you get to somebody who's entrenched in a market or in an industry and you really get their feedback. So that validation point is really, kind of the key thing that we want to get to, because it's also eye-opening, especially for the founder, especially if it's a private individual, maybe it's not coming out of a university setting, but they, because really that becomes almost that point of go or no go, where it's like, hey, we've talked to the marketplace. This is the feedback we've gotten. It's either, hey, if it's all positive and it's thumbs go, then it's like, okay, let's go raise money so we can get this thing going. If it's mixed, then sometimes it's really about, back to the, firm convictions lightly held. It's like, hey, do you, we think you said we're going to go down road A, but we actually think the right market direction for this is to go down road B. How do you feel about that? And really kind of understanding if that's a direction they want to take, or if it's something that they're like, no. They've only seen road A as the only opportunity for them. So that's kind of that validation phase is really where I think we spend a lot of time really just getting some outside opinions besides the founder and ourselves to really make sure that we think that there's a there with whatever concept we have.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing there is you really need to be flexible as you're going through this process, because it's the ugly stage, right, of formation. And so I can look for, is the leader going to be right? Is the idea right? I look for competitive analysis and opportunity. That's market analysis.
Yeah.
But then I love that point about you think you know the problem. And so you're going to go, you take that out and you validate it to solve the problem. But really what you're trying to do is understand the problem.
Yeah. Well,
and make sure it's validated.
I'll give you a case in point. back to 6P color. We had a regime change about 18-ish months ago. The company had been in existence. Look, the science and everything behind the company was proven. I mean, they've got close to 200 patents, if not more, checked all the boxes there. The challenge we had was the CEO and the CTO came from basically had spent 20 some odd years in industry building screens, working for very large LED screen providers. And we had a CEO who was highly talented, but came predominantly from an aerospace and a financial services background and didn't really know the space and relied on the CTO. Well, if the only thing you've done in your career is build screens, when you open your toolbox, there's one tool. Okay.
Right. Right.
It's like, I need a screwdriver, but I'm going to grab that hammer and I'm going to make that hammer work no matter what.
And the world is a nail. Yeah.
And, part of ultimately what happened over a period of time to where 18 months ago was we convinced the private equity firm that was backing this, that a change was needed. We convinced them on a different strategy and that we were aligned with the CEO that they put in place. And it was like gasoline was thrown onto it. But what was great about it was taking an alternative approach. We're saying we're not going to build screens, but we think we actually are a software company that can be embedded within existing technology. What we've found in the process of saying, okay, we're going to build that is we've created other applications to this product that have made the workflow for the end user a lot more simpler. So for example, our color management system takes and produces one file that gets sent out to every single device display. Mm-hmm. If you have, say, an outdoor advertising company with digital boards, they may have to take a file from an advertiser, an ad, and they may have to reformat that thing 100 different times in order to fit 100 different screens. So while our initial value proposition to them was your screens are going to have the most truest form of color, as we were walking through the other things, they're like, wait, stop. And they were the ones who honed in and they said, you're telling me that I only can ingest one file and I can push that out. And he's like, you're going to save me 2 days of work, of actual processing of content that we're going to push out. So we're finding all these other applications, but those are things that you don't really get until you get into that validation phase and you start talking to customers. And that's really where we see the value is we're now coming across a better picture of what our true value proposition is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's classic product market fit, but
yep.
Being willing to, go as you find new opportunities.
Yeah.
And so if I'm building this and I'm launching, an initiative, I'm launching this and trying to commercialize it. Do I do that with my internal team? Do I do that with the existing talent in my team? Or should I skunk work, pull it out completely, or do I outsource it? What do you think?
I think the short answer is either outsource it or do a bit of a hybrid approach. We're finding, and this is, kind of trend over the last few decades, which I wasn't aware, but I grew, like you mentioned, I grew up at AT&T. Mm-hmm. We had Bell Labs. We had AT&T.
Yeah. They're pretty good, right?
Oh, they're fairly decent.
A little bit of tech.
Where 20, 30 years ago, companies had very R&D facilities and infrastructure was all in-house. As cost-cutting measures have come through, that's all started to be outsourced. So you're either outsourcing it, you're probably, many are creating partnerships with the universities because they want to leverage the talent, which, Baylor is right up there, and we worked on a number of those projects. So what we're finding is a lot of, even Fortune 500 companies, if you look at where their R&D facilities and infrastructure and expenses today versus where it was 20, 30 years ago as a percentage of revenue or expense, it's diminished significantly. So to bring that back to your question, a lot of times folks have great ideas, but they also have a business to run. So this is where I say, hey, it's the best options are keeping it in-house. It's probably always going to be a downstream priority from where you are, unless you're an early stage tech company or you've got where you're constantly having to innovate. And some of that happens. But if you're, a legacy company and you're trying to do more, partnering with a company like us where we're leveraging the resources that you have internally, on a smaller scale to get the in-house knowledge, to get the, really the true understandings of the business, But you're bringing in, thought leaders from different areas is probably the right model. Or, if it's a completely, we work with a number of companies that are like, hey, we do resource management and hiring for companies, but we need to have we need to build a solution to do validation or authenticate, do background checks. So we can come in and that's an easy one for us. We're like, you guys don't need to hire an IT team to do that. Just hand it off to us and we'll actually build that software infrastructure layer for you. So, so I would say long-winded answer saying handing it off or partnering, but I think very few cases, especially with small to medium-sized businesses, do you want to try to do it in-house because you're just never going to give it the attention it needs.
Well, and even if you do, I would agree with you 100% because we see this all the time where people say, I'm a services firm and I'm going to become a product or I'm going to build a product.
Yeah.
And our advice and counsel is always, you can't get a little bit pregnant. You have to get that to another team and you have to, prove investment and you have to care about it at that same degree. So I think that's very good counsel. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Do you have anything?
No, I was just going to say I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, those are some of the best clients that we work with. That they're existing businesses. And by the way, I would in our typical nomenclature, they'd qualify as small to medium sized businesses. So they're somewhere between 25 to 400 or 500 employees. But look, smart entrepreneurs that have had success in one area, but also smart enough to know they don't know what they don't know, but they know they need this. And that's where we can really come in and we find a lot. And by the way, those are some of our more, what I would say is just fulfilling projects from a personal level is working with, you work with a founder who's had success, but also has a vision. And you're just like, but also, they also come to you they're very humble and say, I don't know, I know I need this, but I don't know how to build it. And we can actually come in and do it. And it's just really, it's very fulfilling for not just us as owners, but for our teams to get to work on projects like that.
Yeah. Eric, I know why you're successful at this, and I know why you're going to continue to be successful at it. So I am glad that you shared your perspective with everybody, with our listeners. And I just want to say thank you for being on the leaders list.
Well, I appreciate you asking me to join you, Bryon, and it's been a lot of fun. And, it's great given that, you and I think we've known each other for probably at least 20 years. So if you would have asked me 20 years ago if we would be doing this, I probably would have asked you what's a podcast. So
that's a great call.
Yeah.
That's a great call. All right. Thanks, Eric.
All right. Take care.